Mr. Speaker, while we debate the critical issue of Brexit, we must not neglect the crisis facing millions of people across our country. Last week, I wrote to the Prime Minister about the scathing report of the UN Special Rapporteur on this government's brutal policies towards the poorest in Britain. As of now, I've received no reply from the Prime Minister. But when the Prime Minister read the report, what shocked her more? Was it the words the UN used, or was it the shocking reality of rising poverty in Britain?
Prime Minister.
I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and we have been clear, as my Right Honourable friend Secretary of State for Work and Pensions has been, that we don't agree with this report, because what we actually see... No, we don't agree with this report. What we actually see in our country today is absolute poverty at record lows, more people in work than ever before, youth unemployment almost halved, wages growing, and that's because of the balanced approach that we take to our economy, a Conservative government delivering for the British people.
Mr. Speaker, it could be that she doesn't agree with it because it's an unpalatable truth that's in that report. The new Work and Pensions Secretary seems to have taken a lesson from her and created a hostile environment for those that are claiming benefits.
Yes.
One of the government's policies that's causing the greatest anxiety and poverty is universal credit.
Absolutely.
The UN rapporteur, Professor Alston, said it was fast falling into universal discredit.
Yeah.
When will the Prime Minister demonstrate some of her professed concern about burning injustices and halt the rollout of universal credit?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, we've exchanged on this issue of universal credit before. Universal credit... The Shadow Foreign Secretary from a sedentary position says we've not done anything about it. What we have done, as we have been rolling out universal credit, is making changes as we have gone through those changes. But actually, I'm afraid that what we saw was a Labour Party that wouldn't support the changes we were making to universal credit. So we've listened and we've made changes. It's time, actually, that the Labour Party recognise that the universal credit is ensuring that we see more people in work in this country, that we see absolute poverty at record lows. And that's it, a system that delivers for people, encourages them into work, a simpler system that's better for those people who need to use it.
Jeremy Corbyn.
She might just care to cast her eyes over the report from the Trussell Trust. And I quote, "If the 5-week wait isn't reduced, the only way to stop even more people being forced into food banks this winter will be to pause all new claims to universal credit." The UN also called for the 5-week wait to be scrapped. In the coming weeks, universal credit is being rolled out in Anglesey, Blackpool, Milton Keynes, parts of Liverpool, parts of London and Glasgow. People risk being left with no money at Christmas.
That's right.
If the Prime Minister won't halt...
Yes,
If the Prime Minister won't halt the rollout of universal credit, will she at least immediately end the 5-week wait?
exactly.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that he doesn't quite seem to understand how the system actually operates? No one has to wait for money if they need it. We've made advances. We scrapped.
We're less than a third of the way through, and already there's too much noise on both sides of the House. Members must calm themselves. The questions will be heard, however long it takes, and the same is true of the replies. Please try to get used to that. The Prime Minister.
No one needs to wait for their money if they need it. We have made it easier for people to get advances. We've ensured they can get 100% of their first month's payment up front. And we've already scrapped the 7-day waiting period. And as I repeat, what happened when we scrapped the 7-day waiting period? Labour voted against it.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, it's a loan that's offered for some people. And the Trussell Trust has pointed out that food banks... The Trussell Trust has also pointed out that food banks face record demand this December. I just gently say to her and the members behind her, food banks are not just a photo opportunity for Conservative MPs. Who themselves, all of whom supported the cuts in benefit that have led to the poverty in this country. Yesterday, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation research found, and I quote, in-work poverty was rising faster than the overall employment rate due to chronic low pay and insecure work. The United Kingdom has the weakest wage growth of all G20 nations. Living standards have fallen for the majority of people. What is so wrong with our economy that our pay growth is so much worse than each of the other nations in the G20?
Prime Minister.
Right, honourable gentleman, that we now see wages growing faster than they have for nearly a decade. We see employment at record levels. But what the right honourable gentleman wants to do, he talks about scrapping universal credit. What he wants to do is to go back to square one. That means going back to a system that left 1.4 million people spending most of a decade trapped on benefits. It left people paying an effective tax rate of 90%. And it cost every household an extra £3,000 a year. As ever with Labour, it was ordinary working people who paid the price.
Mr. Speaker, the Chief Economist of the Bank of England describes the last decade as a lost decade for wages. And, well, the Prime Minister might laugh at this. It's the reality of people's lives. It's the reality.
Order. I appeal to members making too much noise to stop doing so. And I say very gently to the junior minister on the back bench, who is making far too much noise, but he's ordinarily a good-natured and genial chap. I'm referring to the honourable gentleman, the member for Hexham. You can do, Mr. Opperman, you can do so much better. Try to be a well-behaved citizen today. Well, possibly like some others, but there are quite a lot of badly behaved people. Try to set a better example, Mr. Opperman. You're a Minister of the Crown. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 years ago, a United Nations committee found this government's policies towards disabled people represented a grave and systematic violation of their rights. Does the Prime Minister think that situation has improved in the past 2 years?
Prime Minister.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, first of all, in answer to the latter point that he's made, it's this government that has a key commitment in relation to helping disabled people get into the workplace. There are too many disabled people who have felt that they have not been able to do what they want to do, of actually getting into the workplace, earning an income for themselves and their families, and it's this government that is helping. And the former Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, through the arrangements that she put in place to ensure the disability confident arrangements that she put in place are doing exactly that. But he started off his comments by referencing the last decade. Yes, the last decade have meant that difficult decisions have had to be taken. But why did those difficult decisions have to be taken? They were taken because of the Labour Party's mismanagement of the economy. Remember the letter from the right honourable member for Birmingham Hodge Hill. Under Labour, there is no money left.
Mr. Speaker, when I hear a Prime Minister talking about difficult decisions, what always happens afterwards in these contexts is the poorest lose out in our society. 4.3 million disabled people are now in poverty. 50,000 were hit by appalling cuts to the employment support allowance benefit alone last year. This government labelled disabled people scroungers. It called those unable to work skivers. It created a
Order. I don't need any advice from the Home Secretary. He should seek to discharge his own obligations in his office to the best of his ability. I require no advice from the right honourable gentleman on the discharge of mine. Be clear about that. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government also created a hostile environment. Mr. Speaker, this government created a hostile environment for the Windrush generation. When the UN rapporteur said British compassion for those who are suffering has been replaced by a punitive, mean-spirited and callous approach, he couldn't have summed up this contemptible government any better. Yeah. Child poverty is rising. Homelessness rising. Destitution rising. Household debt rising. When will the Prime Minister turn her warm words into action, end the benefit freeze, repeal the bedroom tax, scrap the two-child cap and halt the rollout of universal credit?
Prime Minister!
The right honourable gentleman referred to the poorest losing out. I'll tell him when the poorest lose out. It's when a Labour government comes in.
Order! The finger-pointing and yelling and braying must stop. I understand that passions are running highly, but on both sides of the House, we need to have some sense of decorum. The Prime Minister.
It's when a Labour government comes in. What this government has done, we've introduced the national living wage. Conservatives, not Labour. We've taken millions of people out of paying tax altogether. Conservatives, not Labour. Under this government, 3.3 million jobs have been created. Every Labour government leaves office with unemployment higher than when it went into office. So what do we see under this government? Our economy is growing, employment is rising, investment is up. We're giving the NHS the biggest single cash boost in its history. Taxes are being cut. Wages are rising. Labour would destroy all that. It's this Conservative government that's building a brighter future for our country.
Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, we were promised strong and stable. What we have is a government in crisis. A government that has lost 2 Brexit secretaries, a Home Secretary, a Foreign Secretary, a Work and Pension Secretary. A government that has suffered from 3 consecutive defeats in just 2 hours. The first government to do so, Mr. Speaker, in 40 years. And now a government found to be in contempt of Parliament. Is it time that the Prime Minister took responsibility? A responsibility for concealing the facts on her Brexit deal from members in this House and the public. Will she take responsibility?
Prime Minister.
He's absolutely wrong about that. We have not concealed the facts on the Brexit deal from members of this House. What he will see is that the legal position that was set out on Monday in the 34-page document, together with the statement made and the answers to questions given by the Attorney-General on Monday, very clearly set out the legal position.
Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, that is an incredibly disappointing response from the Prime Minister. The facts have had to be dragged out of this government by Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this morning we have seen the detail of the legal advice. We have seen the facts that the government tried to hide. Mr. Speaker, this government is giving Northern Ireland permanent membership of the single market and the customs union. The legal advice is clear. It states, despite statements in the protocol that is not intended to be permanent, in international law, the protocol would endure indefinitely. Since the Prime Minister returned from Brussels with her deal, The Prime Minister has been misleading the House, inadvertently or otherwise. The Prime Minister must explain...
Order. There can be no suggestion of otherwise. The right honourable gentleman must make it clear that there is no suggestion that the government is misleading the House deliberately. There can be no question of that. If the right honourable gentleman wants to use the word inadvertently, which people do now and again, he can, but there must be no ambiguity on the point. And I ask the right honourable gentleman to clarify that matter and to order. No, I don't need any advice from anyone. I know exactly what I'm doing, and the right honourable gentleman must comply. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, I did use the word inadvertently, and I repeat it. That since the Prime Minister has returned from Brussels with her deal, the Prime Minister has been misleading the House, perhaps inadvertently. The Prime Minister...
Order. I always want the right honourable gentleman to be heard fully, and he will be. But there can be no imputation of dishonour, and the insertion of the word perhaps suggests the right honourable gentleman wants to keep his options open. The option of imputing dishonour does not exist. That word must now be removed. Please rephrase, continue and complete briefly. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, I say again inadvertently. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister must explain. The Prime Minister must explain why she continues to deny Scotland the rights and opportunities that her deal offers to other parts of the United Kingdom.
Minister.
I say to the right honourable gentleman that I think what he will see, if he makes a careful analysis of the statement that the Attorney-General made in his answer to questions on Monday, and of the legal position that was set out by the government, in many ways unprecedented that the government actually published such a 34-page document, he will see that the advice that he is holding in his left hand has no difference from the statement that was given. Indeed, I might take up the personal challenge from the right honourable gentleman. I have myself said on the floor of this House that there is indeed no unilateral right to pull out of the backstop. What I have also said is it is not the intention of either party that the backstop should A, be used in the first place, or should B, if it is used, should be anything other than temporary. And he finishes off by saying once again that he wants to look to what Scotland should have from the deal. We are leaving the European Union as the whole United Kingdom. We will negotiate as the whole United Kingdom.